Samuel was not the kind of man people noticed at first glance. He lived on the edge of a small western town, where dusty roads and wide fields stretched far into the distance. He was young, quiet, and kept mostly to himself. Every morning he would wake up before sunrise, walk down to his barn and start his chores and feeding the animals, carrying buckets of water, and repairing the fence when it leaned too far. In a place where loud men with rough voices filled the saloon at night, Samuel was different. He didn't drink, didn't fight, and didn't spend his evenings bragging about adventures. People in town called him the Virgin Man, not to be kind but to laugh behind his back. They thought he was too shy, too gentle, too different from them. But Samuel never let their words stay in his heart. He loved the quiet, and he loved taking care of the land his late father had left him. The nights in that part of the world were cold and clear, with stars shining like tiny lanterns in the dark sky. On one of those nights, something happened that would change the way the whole town saw Samuel. It began with a soft wind moving through the dry grass. Samuel was sitting on the small porch outside his barn, holding a mug of warm tea when he noticed a figure moving in the shadows. At first he thought it was a stray animal, but as the shape came closer, he realized it was a person, a girl walking slowly, almost stumbling with each step. Her clothes were dusty, her hair was tangled from the wind, and she looked so tired that it seemed she might fall any second. Samuel stood up at once. He was a quiet man, but kindness came to him naturally. He didn't know her, but it didn't matter. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked softly, stepping forward. The girl didn't speak at first. She looked nervous, like someone who had been through a long, hard journey. She glanced around as if making sure no one was chasing her. Her hands trembled slightly. Samuel didn't push her with questions. He simply opened the barn door and said, "You can rest here. It's warm and safe." The barn wasn't fancy. It had stacks of hay, a small oil lamp hanging on the wall, and the gentle sound of horses breathing. But on that cold night, it was a shelter. He gave her a wool blanket, the only extra one he owned, and placed a cup of warm water near her. She whispered a small "thank you" as she sat down on the hay, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Her voice was soft, almost like the wind. Samuel could tell she hadn't spoken in a long time. For a few minutes, they didn't say anything. The girl rested her head against the wooden wall of the barn and closed her eyes. Samuel quietly made sure the barn door was locked, not to keep her in, but to keep the cold and any danger out. The next morning, the sun rose with a golden light spilling across the fields. Samuel was up early as usual, feeding his horses. The girl was still asleep, wrapped in the blanket. She looked peaceful now, nothing like the frightened traveler from the night before. But soon the quiet morning turned into a storm of whispers. Someone from town had seen the girl near his barn. By midday, the story had already changed 3 or 4 times. People gathered outside the general store, whispering and laughing. They called him foolish, soft, and strange. "Did you hear? Samuel let some stranger into his barn," one man said, shaking his head with a grin. "Of course he did," another replied. "That boy doesn't know how the world works. He'll let anyone walk right in." They didn't care that the girl was tired or scared. They didn't care that Samuel was just being kind. What they loved more than truth was gossip. And gossip grew faster than weeds in dry soil. By afternoon, almost everyone in town had something to say. Some rolled their eyes and said Samuel was too good for his own good. Others made jokes about him, pretending they knew everything when in truth they knew nothing at all. But Samuel didn't argue. He didn't go to town to explain himself. He stayed home, fixing the fence and taking care of his chores, pretending not to hear the whispers that floated across the dusty streets. Inside, though, he felt the weight of their judgment. It wasn't easy to be laughed at. It wasn't easy to stand alone. That night, he sat outside the barn again. The girl had woken up during the day and told him her name was Ayana. She was part of an Apache tribe that lived far beyond the town's edge. She had walked for miles, searching for a place where she could feel safe for a while. Her voice was calm but tired. She didn't tell him everything, and he didn't ask. Samuel believed a person didn't need to explain their entire story to deserve kindness. "I can leave tomorrow," Ayana said quietly, staring at the moon. "You can stay as long as you need," Samuel replied. "You're safe here," her eyes softened. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time. Meanwhile, in town, the laughter continued. At the saloon, a group of men sat around a wooden table, slamming their glasses down and laughing loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can you believe that boy?" one of them said. He lets some girl sleep in his barn and thinks he's a hero. Poor fool. Others joined in, mocking him without even knowing the truth. But the thing about mockery is that it often says more about the people who mock than the person they target. Samuel had a good heart. He didn't need their approval. The following day, Samuel went to town to buy some supplies, flour, salt, and a new rope for his barn. As he walked down the street, he could feel the stares. A few people whispered to each other behind their hands. A couple of them even smirked as he passed, but Samuel kept his head high, not because he liked being talked about, but because he knew he hadn't done anything wrong. Helping someone in need was not shameful. It was human. On his way back home, he saw Ayanna sitting quietly by the fence, brushing one of the horses with careful hands. She had always loved animals. He could tell by the way she touched them, gentle, calm, respectful. For the first time since she arrived, he saw a small smile on her face. That moment reminded him why he had opened the barn door in the first place. He didn't do it for praise. He didn't do it to be a hero. He did it because no one should sleep in the cold without a roof over their head. As night fell again, the whispers in town grew quieter. People still talked, but Samuel didn't let their words live in his mind. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is to stay kind when the world tries to make them feel small. Ayanna began helping him with the animals, feeding the horses and collecting eggs from the chicken coop. She never asked for anything in return. In the evenings, they sat outside and watched the stars. Samuel didn't need to talk much. Silence between them was peaceful. But deep inside, Samuel knew something was coming. The world had its way of turning small whispers into something bigger. He could feel the weight of the town's judgment, and he could see how some people were not just laughing anymore. They were curious, suspicious, and ready to make stories bigger than they were. Still, Samuel stayed the same. His heart didn't change. He believed that kindness was not something to be hidden away. And even though he was mocked, he felt no shame in offering a safe place to someone who needed it. The cold wind blew across the fields once more. The stars shone bright above the barn. Inside, Ayanna slept peacefully, wrapped in the same blanket he had given her the first night. Samuel stood at the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking out at the quiet land. He didn't know that in just a few days, everything would change. Not just for him, but for the entire town. The people who mocked him would hear words they would never forget. But that night he was simply a kind man, standing under the stars, not needing anything more than the quiet of his own heart. The morning came slowly, with a soft pink light stretching across the fields. Samuel walked outside his small wooden house, feeling the chill of the breeze on his face. The barn stood quiet, its door gently moving with the wind. Ayanna was already awake, standing near the fence, brushing the horse's mane with a calm hand. She had a peaceful way about her, as if she carried the quiet of the open land inside her. Samuel smiled a little. In the few days she had been there, the farm felt different. There was more warmth in the silence, more life in the air. She didn't speak much, but the few words she said were honest and kind. But out in town, whispers were no longer soft. People had talked for days, and now the gossip had grown like a snowball rolling down a hill. What started as a quiet laugh had turned into something bigger. Men spoke in loud voices at the saloon. Women whispered in corners, and children repeated what they heard from their parents. Some people said Samuel was a fool for trusting a stranger. Others made jokes behind his back. A few even pretended they knew secrets that didn't exist. It didn't matter that Samuel had done nothing wrong. In a small town, stories didn't need truth to grow. Samuel didn't show how much it weighed on him, but at night, when the world was still, he felt it. No one likes to be laughed at. No one enjoys being the center of cruel jokes. But every time those feelings crept in, he reminded himself of the night he found Ayanna, tired, cold, and alone. He remembered the way her eyes softened when he said she was safe. That was enough for him to keep going. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. It was late in the afternoon when Samuel heard a sound unlike anything he had heard in weeks. The sound of distant horses. He stepped out of the barn and looked toward the open land. In the far distance, several riders were moving toward the town. Dust rose behind them as they approached. The townspeople noticed too. One by one, they came out of their homes and shops, curious and uneasy. It wasn't often that visitors came in groups like this. The riders moved with calm and steady steps. Their clothes and faces made it clear they were from Ayanna's tribe. Samuel glanced at her. She stood still, her hands gripping the fence gently. There was no fear in her eyes, only quiet strength. The riders reached the edge of town and stopped. Among them was an older man with silver streaks in his hair, sitting tall on a chestnut horse. His presence was calm but strong, the kind that made people listen without a word. The townsfolk gathered quickly, whispering to one another. Some of the same people who had spent days mocking Samuel now stood behind each other, unsure of what to do. The older man dismounted his horse slowly. He looked around the crowd, his eyes steady and clear, before walking toward Samuel's farm. The town followed, a silent wave of curious faces. Samuel stood at the gate, watching as the man approached. When they finally met, the older man spoke first. His voice was deep but gentle. "You are Samuel," he said, not as a question but as a fact. Samuel nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." The man's eyes softened as he glanced toward Ayanna, who was standing nearby. "She is safe here," he said, more to his people than anyone else. Ayanna stepped forward and lowered her head in respect. Then the older man turned to the crowd, the same crowd that had mocked and whispered. He spoke slowly, but every word carried weight. "In our way," he said, "a man who opens his door to someone who is alone is not weak. He is strong. A heart that chooses kindness is not a heart to laugh at. It is a heart to honor." The townsfolk grew quiet. No one had expected him to speak like that, he continued. "When a man gives shelter to someone in need without asking for anything in return, he shows something that cannot be bought. Dignity, respect, goodness. These are the things that keep the world from growing cold." The air around them felt still. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. Samuel stood there, unsure of what to say. He had not expected to be called strong. He had simply done what he felt was right. The older man then placed his hand gently on Samuel's shoulder. His touch was light, but it carried deep meaning. "My people will remember your kindness," he said, "and I hope your people will too." For a moment, the silence of the town felt louder than any noise. The same people who had laughed now looked at Samuel differently. Some lowered their heads, ashamed of the things they had said. Others stared, realizing they had judged a man without ever understanding his heart. Samuel felt warmth spread through his chest. He hadn't needed anyone's approval, but hearing those words made the long days of whispers and mockery fade like smoke in the wind. Ayanna stepped closer to Samuel. Her eyes were bright, and though she said nothing, her look said everything. She had found safety in his kindness, and now the world was finally seeing what she had felt from the start. One of the townsmen, the same who had laughed the loudest, cleared his throat. "Samuel," he said awkwardly, we didn't understand." Samuel didn't reply with anger. He didn't need to. He just nodded politely. Sometimes silence is more powerful than any speech. The older man turned to the crowd again. "There is no shame in learning," he said, "but there is shame in laughing at goodness." His voice echoed softly, but it settled deeply into their hearts. Before leaving, he looked at Samuel once more. "You gave when no one else did," he said. "That is the mark of a true man." With that, he and his riders mounted their horses again. Ayanna stood at the gate watching them. She had a choice now, to leave with them or to stay a little longer. She turned to Samuel and smiled softly. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel smiled back. "You're always welcome here," he said. The riders slowly disappeared over the horizon. The townsfolk began to scatter, but the atmosphere was no longer the same. There was no more laughter, no more jokes. Something had shifted in the air. Later that evening, the town was quiet in a way it hadn't been in days. Samuel walked down the street to buy flour again. This time, no one whispered. People nodded at him respectfully. A few even greeted him kindly. At the saloon, the men who once laughed lowered their eyes when he passed. At the general store, the woman who once whispered behind his back offered him a warm smile. Respect had replaced mockery. All it took was a few honest words from a wise man for the town to see clearly. That night, Samuel sat on the porch of his barn once again. The stars were bright above him, shining like silver dust scattered across the dark sky. Ayanna sat beside him quietly, both of them wrapped in the calm of the moment. "You didn't have to help me," she said softly. Samuel shook his head. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." She nodded, understanding the kind of heart he had. Sometimes kindness doesn't need a reason. The wind was cool, carrying the smell of the fields. Samuel leaned back, feeling a quiet peace inside. He wasn't the loudest man in town. He wasn't the richest. But he had something most didn't, a heart that stayed kind even when others tried to make him feel small. Days passed, and the memory of the chief's words lingered in the town. People began to look at Samuel with new eyes. Children who once giggled behind fences now waved at him when he passed by. The men at the saloon nodded politely instead of laughing, and though Samuel never asked for their respect, it grew around him like a soft light, steady and true. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ayanna stood at the barn door with a small bag in her hands. It was time for her to return to her people. Samuel walked her to the edge of the road. "Thank you," she said again, her voice warm. "For the barn, for the blanket, and for seeing me as a person when others wouldn't." Samuel simply smiled. "Safe journeys," he replied. As she walked away, the sky turned gold and pink. Samuel watched her until she disappeared down the road. He didn't feel sad, only grateful. Grateful for the quiet bond they had shared, for the lesson the chief had given the town, and for the way kindness had changed everything without a single fight or loud word. In the months that followed, people still spoke about that day. They remembered the chief's calm voice, the way he spoke about strength and goodness, and the way the town fell silent. And whenever someone passed by Samuel's farm, they remembered the man they had once mocked, and now respected. Samuel kept living the way he always had. Quiet mornings, long days of work, and peaceful nights under the stars. But now when he walked through town, he didn't walk alone with their laughter. He walked with the quiet strength of someone who had done the right thing when it mattered most. Kindness, he had learned, doesn't need a loud voice to be heard. It just needs a brave heart.